Da da da! What's my good cheer? Welcome everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. In the meantime, if you've never popped into one of my lives before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. And oh my goodness, did we pick a doozy word that took me on a doozy kind of ride today? In everything that I was doing in my, day to day, right? Not day to day, but I was up there for sure. And what a great word for us to get. And again, it's in that timing that we should actually take a look at those relationships, especially when we're coming into those holiday seasons, right? If you're anything like me, you come from a very dynamic upbringing. Let's just put it at that. And sometimes our relationships can be, they shouldn't be complicated because in our minds they seem quite simplistic and easy in that interplay, right? But it's in our choices and it's in those moments that each one of us has that, we could rub somebody well or we can rub somebody not so well. So in getting this word, and again, if you've never popped into one of my lives before, we're picking 54 words, impactful words, and not knowing each week what the word is going to be. We pick a word and we delve into it all week. We do this on Mondays. So we're looking today at Tuesday, and we have the second day in this word, right? Which is a really, really important word. And it is our 18th word. And what a great word, connection. So now I have to look at this, and I think all of us should look at this because these were some of the very first lessons that I got, and it took me a while before I even munched on them because it seems so impossible, because I really looked at the people in my life and everything they had done for me, all those gaps that they filled for me. I didn't fill them myself, but those needs and those wants and those desires were being filled for me. And unfortunately, I didn't know it at the time, but it came at a cost. And when those lessons first came to me about taking a look at those impactful connections that we have, okay, I'm not going to say familial, right? But there's all kinds of relationships in our lives that have these connections. You have your family connections, you have your friends connections, you have those work related peer connections, don't we? Then we have those connections, and if you're, highly sensitive or empathic in any way, if you're right, because I'm speaking of myself out of my own experience, right? A lot of those connections that I had were in place to fulfill somebody else's need, or more often than not, to fill my own needs, to fill those gaps that I thought were lacking in my own life, right? Not even testing the waters to see if they were actions or things that I could do for myself or others without that assistance, without somebody telling me how to do it, or listening to the criticism in the way I actually did things and readjusting myself to make somebody else feel a little bit comfortable in that movement I was making, or if I was in their surroundings, making it a little bit comfortable for themselves, right? When I was around them. And also at the same time, it's that contractional, right? That's we always feel whenever anybody does something kind for us that we have to stumble over ourselves to give back, right? Because we don't want to be beholden. And even if we don't have those resources, we'll come up with actions and services in order to pay back these kindnesses. And that's a great thing. I think personally there should be more kindnesses in the world, but it's when we attach those expectations, when you have that, you like me and I'll like you, and you hold me up and I'll hold you up. It's got to be a real sense of loyalty, a real sense of caring for somebody's well being and actually wishing them well, right? Even though you do or may rub them uncomfortably or they rub you uncomfortably, right? Having that understanding that we're all at that stage, and not all souls are going to get along, not all humans get along, right? And we sometimes don't even get along with ourselves, which should be that main priority. And you hear me talking about it all the time. And it's not about, being self-serving, right? But we are no good to anybody else unless we take care of that most important connection, the most important connection, which is that connection to ourselves, right? Because we want all parts of us to have that opportunity, if it wishes or if they wish, to come to the surface, to be seen, to be heard, right? And if they don't want to be seen and don't want to be heard, at least their ideas and their thoughts. And, it's a strange path that I'm traveling, and I'm grateful for I was doing my Christmas cards today, right? And a lot of these people who follow my content, they follow me. And it's so gratifying, and it's so comforting to know that I have some company, right? It's not misery loves company, but sometimes it's that courage that we have to bring up when we do have difficult conversations to have. Or they're not always difficult conversations, but sometimes there are conversations that we don't think not everybody's going to understand. But that's the idea, right? You got to start somewhere. Somebody's got to start, right? To show that it's not that difficult, right? And truly, it hasn't been. That's not to say that it never will be, because, I have been referred to as naive in some of my ideas, but, it complements the movement that I'm trying to make, right? And, and I can admit to that effort that I'm putting in, because I feel the necessity of what I can, if I choose to, right? And, when we listen to other people and when we surround ourselves with these other connections, and sometimes being sensitive and highly empathic, we'll connect with anybody who is willing to be around us, or willing to have us be around them, right? Or willing to listen to their ideas, or live by their ideas, or live by their rules and their actions, and right, and toot their horn, and and support them as the leaders, when in all hindsight we could be just as capable in that. But because we're so highly sensitive, we just go along for the ride. We just go along with whoever's willing to hang out with us, anybody who's seeing or hearing us, or might fill some of those gaps that we have. And that's trauma bonding. And we talk about that every once in a while too, because I got stuck in that, right? I got stuck so bad that I think it's been ongoing for not just years and decades, but possibly lifetimes. And, showing up here fresh as that evidence that I want to be for myself, because, I'm out there looking for that recognition, or maybe not the recognition, but maybe it's the familiarity that I'm seeing mirrored, some of my ideas seeing mirrored out there. And, I see the bits and pieces, but, I don't see, Cindy's ideas. I don't see some of those ideas that I feel so strongly, and right, and I want to immerse myself in that evidence that I feel for myself, but being sensitive and being empathic, and not having those connections that can mirror back in agreement or mirror back in disagreement, or um sometimes we're on the right track, we're seeing part of the truth, but because there's so many gaps that we're not seeing, that because we're creative, we'll fill those holes up with our own ideas, right? Rather than having holes. And I would much rather have those blanks. I would much rather be called naive in my ideas, rather than somebody who's just, right, just playing the game the best that they can, filling those holes for themselves the best that they can. And oh my goodness, there's this gap in my life. Let's just fill it up with this idea because that person said so, right? My parents used to say all the time, my dad say, somebody told you to jump off the bridge. Would you jump off the bridge? Right? And that's the idea that we have to be responsible for ourselves. And I'm not saying do everything, right? Because we pick our partners because they have those strengths that we don't have, those strengths that we admire, but we get into these relationships and then we expect them to fill those holes for us, right? Not expecting them to teach us how they're doing it so we can fill our own holes. But again, in those contractual relationships that we have, there could be that idea or that wish on the other party that, if I fill your gaps, you will always be needing me. You will always have to come to me when you have that problem, right? You will never be able to survive on your own without me. And that shows a weakness in themselves, right? And it's right, not to share the knowledge, not to, right? I follow those that have these ideas that I've never come across before, and they share them out there, and I'm just like, wow, but I get to choose that, right? And maybe that these ideas of being on this word connection is to take a look at those relationships that are in our lives and seeing how they rub with us. How do we feel about ourselves when we are around them? How do we stumble, and how do we support and serve those relationship? And is it reciprocal, right? Is not contractional, because there's a difference. Because when somebody does a kindness for you, right, it's not an expectation they're going to do a kindness for you, right, back. But that's usually how it works with building relationships and holding on to relationships. And right, you want to make sure that your friends and your partners and your children grow up to be the best human beings that they possibly can, with the tools that could possibly help them to survive, right? To survive. And me growing up, like, we were feral kids for sure, right? One good thing that my parents did was to allow us to make our own decisions. Now, it was their household and they ruled their castles. And of course, right there were boundaries and there were expectations in that. But outside of that, we were left to our own device, and we did good by that, and we did sometimes not so good by that, and sometimes we didn't have any choice and we had to ride those waves. But in any case, whatever we were doing, we had to adapt and conquer, because all of us girls, my dad and mom just had girls, right? um, we were adventurers in life, even though we each had different interests, different personalities, different guidance and mentorship in that guardianship that we had. I'm looking at a lot of archetypal kind of roles that each one of us played in that, right? And whether it was with intent, or whether it was by choice, or whether it was just by happen chance, or whether it was things beyond us coming through and dictating, right? The circumstances. These are all, right? Perspectives that we can take, and depending on which branch that we go down, right? That will dictate the connections that we will make. And it will also um, give us reflections on other relationships. And like I said, when I first woke up to some of these ideas, I had to take a look at the connections that I had, and I was shocked. I was heartbroken sometimes, right? In some of those relationships that I thought were solid, right? That they had my back and they loved me as much as I loved them. They were invested in me as much as I was invested in them. To wake up to the idea of that was not the case. And in fact, some of these relationships were very contractional, and a lot of those negative feelings, a lot of that guilt and shame that I carried around, and they carried around too. And a lot of that contractional stuff, like, these were all lessons I had to pick up along the way, right? Right? And those connections that I made along the way were detrimental in me to understand that, you have to make some difficult decisions sometimes, and sometimes you have to make some difficult, even realizations of what some of these very important relationships in our own minds, right? And some of these important relationships to you that might not be so important to others. And you got to hold yourself accountable too, right? Because we've been filling our gaps with other people's, right, offering. So we are just as guilty in that, right? In that trauma bonding, in that filling the gaps for each other, right? Rather than helping each other learn to fill their own gaps. That's why we're offering up that information, right? It's why I show up here fresh like a loaf of bread every single day, right? And even in my little drummer boy, little drummer girl kind of mentality, I'm going to call it that, right? I have something to offer in my experience. And, the most amazing relationships I had were with people who were not even woke to any of these ideas. And some of those relationships were very woke, and yet I wasn't. And yet we found each other. And if we were to find each other again, I know I would connect with them immediately, because we had that connection, right? We had that bond, and I'm going to feel it out, and I'm going to remember the feeling that I realized in that moment, or maybe that feeling that I didn't realize, but now in this moment with a few lessons under the belt, right? That I can look at it in a different way by putting myself in my own shoes, putting myself in other people's shoes, and looking at it as, right, sometimes the spectator, and make those realizations in the moment and see the good and bad in the absorption or the lack of, right, in those connections that we make along the way. Every connection in my life, especially if it stuck around for a while, was important. I don't hold people dear unless they're dear. I'm just not that person, right? And I have deer, like I said, I just finished my Christmas cards, and I have deers in my life that I have never met personally, except maybe through some emails or some letters, maybe some workshops, right? But they are important to me because we made that connection, whether it was in a small way or a big way, right? And my wish for myself, as well as the wish for whoever I'm in that connection with, is that we help each other to fill those gaps for ourselves rather than have somebody fill my gap. And then, right? Then there's that expectation that whatever gap that they have in their life, that I'm going to fill it for them because they did that kindness for me. And when you think that way, we have to remember that's a connection you have to take a look at, because that's a connection of contract. That's a connection that we have um, put together transactionally, right? And I give out the Christmas cards because, right, that's who I am. That's where my thoughts are. There's no underlining reason for that except to say, thank you for hanging with me. Thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for being that, um, what is that? Inspiration, motivation, muse to help me keep going, help me to keep wanting to go, right? Because, well, we've made friends now. We have connections that are invested in this now. And some of those connections are making movement in the evidence that I'm putting to the table too. So we have to take that all into consideration, right? When we're looking at our our people, when we're looking at even the smallest, right? If we're seeing them regularly, maybe it's just the caretaker, maybe it's just the front door guy, maybe it's the mailman, right? But we build these relationships and they rub on us positively, and some rub on us not so positively. And I have to tell you the truth that when I released some of these relationships, and some of these relationships were very important to me, but they were neither serving me or serving anybody else. And like I said, it took me a while. It really, it didn't even, I was getting the lessons, and then a year later I was finally absorbing the lessons. But even then it took me in, because these relationships in my heart and in my mind, and even to this moment, are important to me. But I also know they were detrimentally unhealthy for me. And being in service to myself above anything else, knowing that I am no good to anybody unless I take care of myself. Eventually, it took a while. Hopefully, not as long for you guys as it was for me, and that's the truth. And that's not my lesson. That's a lesson I learned. along the way, right? But that's all it is. We resonate what we resonate with, and you take those lessons far down the road as you're interested or compelled in without feeling guilt and shame in any of it, right? But taking those lessons with you, hopefully taking those lessons with you, can you, so you can fill those gaps yourself, just like when I leave the lessons that I take in, that I'm taking them with me and utilizing them to fill myself up in so many different ways, right? Connections are very, very important, but sometimes we have to, before we start on adding to the collection of connections, we should take a look at the connections that we have right now and figure out, right, which ones should be staying, which ones we should be looking at, and maybe possibly, building some boundaries or having some conversations, right? Saving, just letting them know that this isn't the way I work. Can we figure something out? And then those ones that you just, right, you just flat out, you just can't do anymore because you see the evidence of how it makes you feel, right? And we know when we feel negatively that way, right? We will dig ourselves that pit and we'll bury our heads in it for a while. 100%. Okay, you guys, connection. That's the word we got this week. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll look at it maybe a different way, maybe the same way, and just going deeper because I could talk a little while for this, but it is late, and I just wanted to get the conversation going. But we'll come back tomorrow, and I'll come back tonight right after this live and just watch my live over again, just to take the lesson in for myself, and maybe it'll give me a different perspective and a way to come at it tomorrow. Okay, you guys, have a great night, and we'll see each other tomorrow.